What if the map of the world you know is incomplete? What if, not so long ago in human history, North America was not an isolated continent at all, but part of a vast connected world, linked by a land now lost beneath the ocean? This forgotten place was called Beringia. During the height of the last ice age, known to scientists as the last glacial maximum, Earth's climate changed dramatically. Temperatures dropped across the globe, and massive ice sheets formed over northern Europe, Canada, and parts of Asia. These glaciers trapped enormous quantities of water, causing global sea levels to fall by more than 100 meters. As the oceans receded, the shallow waters between Siberia and Alaska disappeared. In their place emerged a landmass unlike anything we see today. Geologists studying ancient shorelines and sediment layers beneath the modern Bering Strait have shown that this was not a narrow land bridge or a temporary crossing. It was a massive region larger than California, stretching from northeastern Asia deep into what is now western Alaska. This land had rivers. It had rolling grasslands. It had seasonal wetlands and dry steppe. Pollen samples recovered from sediment cores revealed grasses, shrubs, and flowering plants adapted to cold but productive environments. This ecosystem is often described by scientists as a mammoth steppe, a landscape capable of supporting enormous herds of grazing animals. And it did. Woolly mammoths, steppe bison, horses, musk oxen, and caribou moved freely across Beringia. Their bones have been found on both sides of the Pacific, genetically linked in ways that only make sense if this land once connected the continents. According to paleoclimatic research published by Arctic scientists and supported by genetic studies of Ice Age animals, Beringia remained mostly ice-free. The massive glaciers that blocked movement elsewhere did not cover this region. This made Beringia not only habitable, but livable. And where animals thrive, humans follow. Radiocarbon dating and archaeological modeling suggest that Beringia emerged above sea level roughly 25,000 years ago. It remained exposed for thousands of years, forming a stable ecological zone rather than a fleeting pathway. Some researchers believe human populations may have lived in Beringia itself for generations, hunting, adapting, and waiting for the ice to change. Eventually, as global temperatures rose, glaciers began to melt, sea levels climbed. Slowly, relentlessly, the oceans reclaimed the land. By around 11,000 years ago, Beringia was gone, submerged beneath the cold waters of the Bering Strait. But by then, the damage, or the miracle, was done. Humans had crossed into the Americas. They did not arrive in a single moment. They did not flood in overnight. They moved carefully, over centuries, guided by animals, climate, and survival. The Bering Land Bridge was not just a route, it was a world. And its disappearance erased the physical evidence of humanity's first great migration into the Americas, leaving behind only clues buried in ice, bone, and DNA. If humans truly crossed into the Americas on foot, one question immediately follows. Who were they? They were not explorers chasing maps. They were not conquerors seeking land. They were Ice Age survivors, people whose lives depended on reading the land, following animals, and enduring cold that modern humans rarely experience. Archaeologists and geneticists now believe that the first Americans descended from ancient populations living in northeastern Siberia during the late Ice Age. Genetic studies of modern indigenous peoples of the Americas show clear links to these Siberian ancestors, particularly through mitochondrial DNA and Y chromosome markers. But the journey was not simple. Between Siberia and Alaska lay Beringia, a land that was harsh, windswept, and unforgiving. Winters were long and brutal. Summers were short but productive. Survival required deep knowledge of animal behavior, seasonal migration patterns, and tool-making. These early humans were expert hunters. Stone tools found in Siberia and Alaska show remarkable similarity. Blades, scrapers, and projectile points suggest a shared technological tradition. Archaeologists studying sites on both sides of the former land bridge note that these tools were designed for processing large animals, cutting meat, scraping hides, and shaping bone. This tells us something critical. These people were not wandering aimlessly. They were following food. Mammoths, bison, and other megafauna migrated across Beringia in response to climate and vegetation. Humans followed these herds, moving slowly, season by season, generation by generation. Some scientists now argue that people did not simply pass through Beringia, they stayed there. This idea is known as the Beringian standstill hypothesis. Genetic evidence suggests that a population of humans became isolated in Beringia for thousands of years, cut off by massive ice sheets to the east and west. During this time, they adapted to extreme cold, developed distinct genetic markers, and waited for the ice to retreat. During the peak of the Ice Age, enormous glaciers blocked the path south into the rest of North America. Known as the Laurentide and Cordilleran ice sheets, these walls of ice made further migration impossible. So people lived. They hunted. They raised children. All within a land that no longer exists. When the climate warmed and the glaciers began to melt, new routes opened. Ice-free corridors formed. Coastal pathways emerged. And slowly the descendants of these Ice Age pioneers moved southward into lands no human had ever seen. This was not a single migration. Archaeological and genetic evidence increasingly supports multiple waves of movement spread over thousands of years. Some groups may have traveled inland. Others may have followed the Pacific coastline, using boats and shoreline resources. What unites them all is this: they were not accidental settlers. They were deliberate survivors. Every step into the Americas was earned through knowledge, endurance, and adaptation to a world balanced on the edge of ice. And as they crossed into this new continent, they carried with them not just tools and genes, but the foundation of every culture that would follow. For much of the 20th century, the story of how humans arrived in the Americas seemed settled. According to the dominant theory, the first Americans crossed Beringia near the end of the Ice Age and moved south through an ice-free corridor, arriving around 13,000 years ago. Their presence was identified by distinctive stone tools known as Clovis points, named after discoveries near Clovis, New Mexico. For decades, this timeline was treated as fact. Then, the evidence began to refuse cooperation. Archaeologists working across North and South America started finding sites that were clearly older than Clovis. These discoveries did not appear in one place alone. They appeared everywhere. At Monte Verde in southern Chile, researchers uncovered wooden structures, hearths, stone tools, and plant remains dated to at least 14,500 years ago. The site was so well preserved that traces of seaweed and medicinal plants were still identifiable. The findings were published and reviewed extensively, forcing archaeologists to accept that humans had reached the southern edge of South America far earlier than previously believed. This posed a serious problem. If people were in Chile 500 years ago, they had to enter North America much earlier than 13,000 years ago. Further north, evidence continued to mount. At Paisley Caves in Oregon, scientists discovered fossilized human feces, coprolites containing human DNA. Radiocarbon dating placed these remains at over 14,000 years old, confirming human presence in western North America before the Clovis culture. In Texas, excavations at the Galt site revealed stone tools beneath Clovis layers, suggesting earlier occupation. Similar pre-Clovis evidence emerged from sites in Florida, Mexico, and even the Arctic. Perhaps the most striking evidence came from White Sands, New Mexico. In 2021, researchers published findings of human footprints preserved in ancient lakebed sediments, dated to approximately 21,000 to 23,000 years ago. These footprints, confirmed through multiple dating techniques, showed adults and children walking across a muddy shoreline while giant Ice Age animals roamed nearby. This was not theory. This was behavior frozen in time. The footprints suggested that humans were present in the Americas during the height of the Ice Age, when massive ice sheets still blocked inland routes. Which raised a critical question: how did they get there? The traditional ice-free corridor may not have been open yet. This has led many researchers to reconsider the importance of coastal migration. According to this model, early humans traveled along the Pacific coastline, using boats, marine resources, and shoreline campsites to move southward. Evidence supporting this idea comes from early sites on islands and coastal regions, as well as genetic studies indicating rapid southward expansion. Unfortunately, many ancient coastal sites are now submerged beneath rising seas, making them difficult or impossible to find. Still, the genetic record remains. DNA studies of indigenous populations across the Americas show a deep, shared ancestry, consistent with an early migration followed by diversification. Linguistic patterns also support long-term separation and adaptation across regions. Together, archaeology, genetics, and geology tell a clear story. Humans arrived in the Americas earlier than once believed. They arrived by multiple routes. And they arrived prepared. The footprints in the ice did more than rewrite timelines. They reminded us that history is not static. It waits, buried beneath sand, water, and time, until evidence forces us to look again. Crossing into the Americas was only the beginning. Survival came next. When the first humans moved south from Beringia into the vast lands beyond the ice, they entered a continent unlike anything they had known. Environments shifted rapidly, from icy tundra to dense forests, open plains, deserts, and coastlines. Each demanded new strategies, new tools, and new ways of living. Archaeological evidence shows that early Americans adapted with remarkable speed. Stone tool traditions diversified as people encountered different animals and landscapes. In the Great Plains, hunters developed large projectile points designed for massive prey. In forested regions, tools became smaller and more flexible, suited for hunting deer and processing plant foods. Along rivers and coasts, fishing technologies emerged: hooks, nets, and stone weights. These adaptations are visible in archaeological layers across the continent, where tool styles change over time and space. Researchers studying sites from Alaska to Patagonia have noted how quickly regional traditions developed, suggesting cultural innovation rather than simple imitation. Food sources expanded as well. Early Americans were not solely big-game hunters. While mammoths, mastodons, and giant bison were important resources, plant remains found at sites like Monte Verde reveal a diverse diet, that included tubers, berries, seeds, and seaweed. This flexibility was crucial in unfamiliar environments, but adaptation came with consequences. As humans spread across the Americas, many large animals disappeared. Woolly mammoths, giant ground sloths, saber-toothed cats, and other megafauna went extinct near the end of the Ice Age. Scientists continue to debate the causes, but many agree that human hunting pressure, combined with rapid climate change, played a significant role. Evidence of human interaction with megafauna has been found at multiple sites. Cut marks on bones, butchered carcasses, and hunting tools embedded in skeletal remains suggest direct exploitation. These findings, discussed widely in paleoecological research, point to humans as active agents in reshaping ecosystems. Yet adaptation was not only ecological, it was social. Small, mobile groups gradually developed distinct cultural identities. Over generations, shared knowledge became tradition. Language diversified. Rituals emerged. Burial practices changed. Art appeared in the form of carvings, pigments, and symbolic objects. Genetic studies indicate that once populations moved south of the ice sheets, they expanded rapidly. This expansion helps explain the extraordinary diversity of indigenous cultures across the Americas today. From the Arctic to the Amazon, early adaptations laid the foundations for thousands of unique societies. What is striking is how quickly humans learned. Within a few thousand years, people had settled nearly every habitable environment in the Western Hemisphere. This speed suggests not reckless movement, but confidence, built on knowledge inherited from Ice Age ancestors who had already survived extreme conditions. Archaeologists often emphasize this point. The first Americans were not desperate wanderers. They were skilled, observant, and adaptable. They understood animals. They understood seasons. They understood landscapes. And as they spread across the continent, they transformed it, sometimes gently, sometimes irrevocably. The Americas were no longer an untouched world. Today, Beringia no longer appears on any map. Where a vast land once stretched between Asia and North America, there is now only cold, restless water. The Bering Strait hides what was once a living world. Its rivers, campsites, animal trails, and human footsteps submerged beneath the sea. And this presents one of the greatest challenges in reconstructing the story of the first Americans. Most of the physical evidence is gone. As global temperatures rose at the end of the Ice Age, melting glaciers returned water to the oceans. Sea levels climbed steadily, drowning coastlines and low-lying lands. Beringia disappeared beneath the waves, taking with it the archaeological record of thousands of years of human activity. What remains is fragmentary. Archaeologists working in Alaska and northeastern Siberia have uncovered sites along what were once the edges of Beringia, stone tools, animal bones, hearths, and campsites. These finds suggest a long-term human presence near the land bridge. But the heart of Beringia itself lies underwater, inaccessible, using traditional excavation methods. Marine geologists and archaeologists have begun using sonar mapping, underwater coring, and remote sensing to search the seafloor. Sediment cores extracted from beneath the Bering Strait reveal layers of ancient soil, pollen, and freshwater deposits, clear indicators that this region was once dry land. In these cores, scientists find traces of grasses and plants that could not survive underwater, confirming that Beringia supported a productive ecosystem. The absence of ice sheet indicators further supports the idea that this land remained habitable during the coldest periods of the Ice Age. Yet direct human artifacts, tools, dwellings, or burials remain elusive. This absence has fueled debate. Some researchers argue that humans passed quickly through Beringia, leaving minimal trace. Others believe that people lived there for generations, but that rising seas erased nearly all evidence. Genetic studies, particularly those supporting the Beringian standstill hypothesis, favor the latter explanation. According to this hypothesis, ancestral Native American populations were isolated in Beringia for thousands of years. DNA evidence shows a pause in genetic divergence, consistent with a long-term population bottleneck. This suggests people were not simply passing through, they were waiting. Waiting for the ice to retreat. Another unresolved question concerns migration routes. The traditional inland route, through an ice-free corridor between the Laurentide and Cordilleran ice sheets, may not have opened early enough to explain the oldest archaeological sites. This has led scientists to seriously consider the coastal migration theory. Under this model, early humans traveled along the Pacific coastline, using boats, shoreline camps, and marine resources. This route would have allowed rapid movement southward, even while inland paths remained blocked by ice. The problem is evidence. Much of the ancient coastline now lies underwater. Early coastal camps would have been submerged and destroyed as sea levels rose, leaving little trace for archaeologists to find. This creates a frustrating paradox. The most plausible route may be the hardest to prove. Still, indirect evidence persists. Early human remains found on islands, coastal regions, and areas far south of the ice sheets suggest rapid dispersal. Genetic data supports this speed, and ethnographic comparisons show that coastal hunter-gatherers can thrive in similar environments. Beringia then remains both a solution and a mystery. It explains how humans could reach the Americas, but it hides the details of how they lived there. Beneath the cold waters of the Bering Strait lies a lost chapter of human history, one that science continues to search for, knowing that every new discovery has the potential to change what we think we know. If the ice blocked the land, the ocean may have opened the way. As evidence mounted that humans were present in the Americas earlier than the opening of the inland ice-free corridor, archaeologists were forced to reconsider a long-dismissed idea, the coastal migration route. According to this theory, the first Americans did not wait for glaciers to retreat. Instead, they moved southward along the Pacific coastline, traveling by foot and boat, following beaches, kelp forests, and marine life. This idea is sometimes called the Kelp Highway hypothesis. Researchers studying modern and ancient coastal ecosystems point out that kelp forests form one of the most productive environments on Earth. They provide fish, shellfish, sea mammals, birds, and edible plants. Everything a small, mobile group would need to survive. Ethnographic studies of coastal hunter-gatherers show that such environments can support year-round settlement with relatively simple technology. And crucially, this route would have remained accessible even when massive ice sheets blocked inland movement. Genetic evidence supports rapid southward dispersal. DNA studies indicate that once populations entered the Americas, they spread extraordinarily fast, reaching South America within a few thousand years. This speed is difficult to explain using only inland routes, but it makes sense if people followed coastlines. Archaeological hints of early coastal occupation appear in scattered locations. On California's Channel Islands, researchers have uncovered evidence of human presence dating back more than 13,000 years, including tools and remains of marine resource use. Similar findings appear in coastal British Columbia and southeastern Alaska, where ancient camps suggest long-term exploitation of marine environments. Further south, early sites like Monteverde in Chile, far from any inland ice-free corridor, support the idea that people moved along the Pacific Rim long before glaciers fully retreated. But there is a problem. Most of the coastline these early migrants would have used no longer exists. As sea levels rose at the end of the Ice Age, ancient shorelines were submerged. Campsites, tool-making areas, and travel routes were drowned and erased. Unlike inland sites preserved by sediment and ice, coastal evidence was swallowed by the ocean. Marine archaeologists now use sonar, submersibles, and underwater sampling to search for traces of these lost landscapes. Studies of submerged terraces and ancient shorelines show that habitable coastal zones once existed far offshore. Yet finding human artifacts underwater is extraordinarily difficult. Despite this challenge, the coastal migration theory continues to gain support, not because of a single discovery, but because it solves multiple puzzles at once. It explains early arrival dates, it accounts for rapid dispersal, and it fits what we know about human adaptability. Importantly, this does not mean there was only one route. Most researchers now agree that the peopling of the Americas was complex and multi-layered. Some groups may have moved inland when ice corridors opened. Others may have stayed near the coast. Migration likely occurred in pulses, over thousands of years, shaped by climate shifts and resource availability. The story of the first Americans is no longer a straight line. It is a web of paths, across land, along ice, and beside the sea. And Beringia sits at the center of that web, a gateway not just of earth and grass, but of possibility. Long after the land bridge disappeared beneath the sea, its influence remained. The first migrations into the Americas did not end when people crossed Beringia. In many ways, that crossing was only the beginning of a much longer transformation, one that shaped culture, language, and identity across an entire hemisphere. As early groups spread southward, they did not remain the same. They adapted. They diverged. They became new peoples. Genetic studies of indigenous populations across North, Central, and South America reveal a deep shared ancestry, pointing back to a small founding population. Yet within that shared origin lies extraordinary diversity. Over thousands of years, isolated groups developed unique genetic markers, reflecting long periods of separation and adaptation to local environments. This genetic pattern mirrors what linguists observe in language. Today, the Americas contain hundreds of distinct indigenous languages, grouped into dozens of language families. Linguists studying these patterns note that such diversity requires immense time to develop. Language does not fragment overnight. It evolves slowly, generation by generation. The sheer linguistic diversity of the Americas strongly suggests an early arrival, far earlier than once believed. This supports archaeological evidence pointing to human presence well before 13,000 years ago. Culture followed a similar path. Early technologies diversified rapidly. Stone tools, hunting strategies, and settlement patterns changed as people encountered forests, plains, deserts, mountains, and coastlines. Archaeologists tracing these changes see not stagnation, but creativity. In the Arctic, ancestors of today's Inuit developed technologies for hunting marine mammals in extreme cold. In the Great Plains, societies evolved communal hunting methods for bison. In the Amazon, people learned to manage forests, cultivate plants, and shape ecosystems in sustainable ways. These adaptations were not random. They were built on knowledge carried from the Ice Age, skills in observation, cooperation, and long-term planning. The descendants of Beringian migrants did not simply survive new environments, they transformed them. Importantly, this legacy challenges outdated narratives. For much of modern history, indigenous peoples were portrayed as recent arrivals or passive occupants of the land, but the evidence tells a different story. Indigenous cultures are among the oldest continuous cultures on Earth, with roots stretching back tens of thousands of years. Their ancestors were not latecomers. They were pioneers. They navigated ice ages. They crossed vanished continents. They adapted to worlds still forming. Even the disappearance of megafauna may be part of this legacy. While climate change played a role, human hunting and environmental impact likely contributed to the extinction of mammoths, giant sloths, and other large animals. This interaction reshaped ecosystems, influencing the development of agriculture, settlement, and social organization. The first migration into the Americas set off a chain reaction that continues today. Languages, traditions, stories, knowledge systems, all trace their origins back to that forgotten land beneath the sea. Beringia may be gone, but its descendants are everywhere. Beringia is gone. No ruins mark its cities. No monuments rise from its plains. No written records tell its story. And yet, its absence may be its greatest lesson. For thousands of years, Beringia existed as a living world, a place where humans adapted, survived, and quietly prepared for one of the most important migrations in history. When the oceans rose and swallowed the land, they erased its physical presence but not its consequences. Every indigenous culture across the Americas carries the echo of that crossing. Modern science continues to return to Beringia, not as a myth, but as a critical chapter in human history. Advances in genetics have allowed researchers to reconstruct ancient population movements with remarkable precision. DNA evidence shows that all indigenous peoples of the Americas descend from a small founding population, one that passed through Beringia and remained isolated there long enough to develop distinct genetic markers. This finding aligns with the Beringian standstill hypothesis, which suggests that humans lived in Beringia for thousands of years, adapting to extreme cold while waiting for the ice to retreat. This theory is supported not by a single discovery, but by the convergence of genetics, climate modeling, and archaeology. Beringia challenges the way we think about migration. It reminds us that migration is not always movement. Sometimes it is waiting. Sometimes it is endurance. It also forces us to confront the limits of archaeology. Much of the most important evidence lies underwater, beyond the reach of traditional excavation. Researchers now rely on underwater mapping, sediment analysis, and remote sensing to reconstruct landscapes that no longer exist. Each technological advance brings new possibility, but also new uncertainty. We may never recover Beringia's campsites. We may never find its hearths or burial grounds. But absence does not mean insignificance. In fact, Beringia may be one of the most influential places humans ever lived, precisely because it no longer exists. Its story reshapes how we understand the peopling of the Americas. It dismantles simple timelines. It replaces singular narratives with complexity, resilience, and adaptability. And it carries a broader message. Human history is not written only in stone and text. It is written in movement, in survival, in decisions made under pressure. The people who crossed Beringia were not seeking to change the world. They were trying to live. Yet by doing so, they transformed an entire hemisphere. As sea levels continue to rise today, Beringia serves as a quiet warning. Landscapes vanish, histories disappear, and unless we look carefully, the most important chapters of our past may remain hidden beneath the surface. America's first gateway was not a port. It was not a fleet. It was a forgotten land, and through it walked the ancestors of millions, changing the course of human history forever.